Today is a very special day as we convene here to celebrate Janusz Kornai's 90th birthday. And I'm very happy to be here. And first, before my brief remarks, I want to share with you some of the stories I had with Janusz. My first encounter with Janusz was exactly 35 years ago in 1983. It was Professor Wu Jinglian, we just saw his video greetings, who introduced me to his works when he was a visiting scholar at Yale. At the time, I was a graduate student in the School of Management. And later that year, I met Janusz in Michael Montia's seminar on comparative economics. My first published Chinese article was about Janusz's work. It was written in 1986 and titled Kornai's Economic Theory and Socialist Economic Reform. It was the first article in Chinese I ever published. It was a long article, 16,000 Chinese characters. So I surveyed very extensively Kornai's work from Over-Centralization published in 1958 to Contradictions and Dilemmas published in 1986, and the forthcoming Journal of Economic Literature article, The Hungarian Reform Process, Visions, Hopes, and Reality. Also in 1986, Kornai's book, Economic Shortage, was published in China. So I published my article on Kornai in early 1987, so that was a very well read article. And then in late 1980s, I, under the supervision of Janusz Kornai and Eric Moskin, I wrote my PhD thesis at Harvard. And I became the first Chinese student completed my PhD under the supervision of both in 1990. One of the essays in my dissertation is about shortage under soft budget constraint, which has the two main concepts developed by Kornai, soft budget constraint and shortage, and used a game theoretical model developed initially by Eric, which Eric this morning talked about that paper, and also I later published this paper. So, all these, today's event brought me back to those very happy days that worked together under the supervision by both Janusz and Eric. So in my remarks today, I only have one slide, is tribute to Janusz as surplus, innovation, and the system, the three keywords that he worked throughout his life. So to show the importance of Kornai's research today on China, I want to start from Kornai's 2013 book, Dynamism, Rivalry, and the Surplus Economy, two essays on the nature of capitalism. This is, I believe, the one most recent book he published. In that book, and I think that based on his lifetime work on comparing systems, capitalism is revealed, the nature of capitalism is revealed in two ways in that book. There are two essays. First, surplus is the one nature of capitalism, not shortage. And second, closely related, surplus leads to innovation and entrepreneurship. There are very strong positive and normative implications from these two essays. In Janusz's view, it is the out of equilibrium resource allocation that is surplus, that leads to incentives for entrepreneurs in capitalist economies to innovate. Okay, that's the basic logic to summarize his views about nature of capitalism, which gives the fundamental reason that drives the dynamism of capitalism, which is, again, in turn, the most significant advantage of capitalism over socialism. Okay, this is actually a very brief summary of his very, very recent work based on his lifetime research. I think this is a very important insight. It's not, the advantage of capitalism over socialism is not just the efficiency of resource allocation in a static sense, supply demand, but rather this innovation and dynamism. So this is basically so this is a starting point of my remarks. So I now want to use this perspective as a benchmark to look at China. Before 1990, China was a shortage economy and without much innovation. This fits very well to Kornein's characterization of socialism, and also explains why Kornein's books, in particular the economics shortage, was so popular in China in 1980s. Professor Wu just showed that the citations surpassed Paul Samuelson and Milton Friedman for a very good reason. Now, fast forward to today. China now is a surplus economy. Okay, it's no longer a shortage economy. In fact, during Janusz's 2 visits to China, once in 1999, the second time in 2000, he already told me and observed that Chinese economy was not a shortage economy. Now, after 40 years of reform, China's economy becomes a surplus economy. Here are some evidence. First, one of the Chinese government's major initiatives is to eliminate or reduce so-called excess capacity and too much inventory. If we use Kornein's index, actually Kornei developed the index, it's named after him, to measure shortage or surplus using the inventory using the input inventory over the output to be delivered, China is clearly a surplus economy. Second, outside of China, a few years ago, there was even accusation of China of exporting deflation. And the evidence provided was precisely about Chinese economy produced a big surplus. So I think evidence is very clear. So that's the first part, the surplus part. The second part, how about innovation? I think this is a bit more complicated. Let me try to explain what's going on here in a very short paragraph. I want to show that huge change is happening, so it's in the process of developing. Recently, the Chinese government has this official assessment about innovation in China. There are 3 parts. It's very cautious, but actually interesting. It says in some areas, China leads the world in innovation. In some other areas, China is in the first tier of countries on innovation frontier. But the third part, the most other areas, China still lags behind the advanced countries. Let me be a little bit more specific to explain, because this is really interesting. First, what are the areas that China actually becomes the leader in the innovation? Because by itself, it just happened in the last few years. Last year, the popular media in China cited the following 4 so-called China's 4 new inventions. First is high-speed rail. Second, very popular e-commerce. Third, perhaps the world's largest mobile payment practice. And the fourth, ride-sharing bicycles. Of course, these are much less fundamental than compared to the Chinese ancient 4 great ancient inventions we know: compass, gunpowder, paper making, and printing. But they are significant. I think that all of those 4 could be listed in the Cornell's table of innovation. He has a table of innovations. I think all these 4 on the equal importance of those innovations in his book. So that is the first area that China did have some areas become the leaders on innovation. Second area, the following areas, China is in the on the par or in the first tier of the innovation frontier. For example, these days, people talk about artificial intelligence, electric cars, battery technologies, nuclear power generation, and some others. This is the view, by the way, this is not from the government. This is the view from the venture capitalists from the Silicon Valley of the US. When you talk to them, they tell you what are the areas they like to make investment, and they feel China is moving together with other parts of the US. So they do make investments. So I think it is it's not entirely unrealistic. A third, of course, there's most other areas China is still way behind. So I very briefly described to you there are some facts about innovation. Next, let's look closer to these 4 areas to find out what's really going on there. Except for the high-speed rail, which is mainly driven by the government, all the other three areas are driven by entrepreneurs and the private sector. This is an interesting comparison with the former Soviet Union, where all innovations, such as Sputnik in 1957, was completely driven by the government. In the above China's case, one of the 4 is driven, only one of the 4 driven by the government, and 3/4 driven by the private sector. I think this fits very well to the general pattern of China. In innovation, the role of the government did not disappear. It showed up in one case, but the private sector plays a dominant role. Moreover, privately driven innovation in China has international significance. It's not a minor show. It becomes a major show. I give you some evidence there. On the top 10 list of the startup high-tech companies valued over $10 billion, not $1 billion. $1 billion will be called unicorn. $10 billion, but privately held, not yet publicly listed. 6 are from the US, not surprising, and 4 from China. None from Europe, from Japan, or from other countries. The 4 Chinese startups include companies in e-commerce, ride-sharing, etc. The list actually does not include Huawei, arguably the most innovative Chinese firm, because Huawei is not only privately held, but does not have any external investors, so there's no market value can be established. But it is certainly one of the most innovative private firms in China. So now I want to go back to Cornell's 2 essays. China has all the characteristics of being a capitalist economy according to his analysis. It is a surplus economy, and it is moving fast toward an innovative economy. While China is still a middle-income country with average GDP of $9,000. So remember, China is still a middle-income country, not an advanced country yet. So its innovation record is above the countries at the similar development stage. That's important to recognize. But above some of the advanced countries, the countries that have the higher income. In fact, most international ranking on innovation rank China above its per capita income level would suggest. Okay, that's basically the first two parts I want to talk about, surplus innovation. However, China's status as a market economy or capitalism is very troubling for two reasons. First, it is not a free market economy or liberal market economy as we understand the term. And that's why sometimes it's called state capitalism in the West or called socialism with Chinese characteristics by the Chinese government for good reasons. The state still owns a large part, though not majority part of the economy, and certainly controls the most critical part of the economy. Second, I think more fundamentally and critically, as the first two presentations of this afternoon, David Li and Chenggang Xu, in particular Chengang's yesterday's lecture, China is still a totalitarian country. This leads us to the system part of my remarks. For that, we need to go back to Kornai's book, The Socialist System, which provides a systematic analysis of a totalitarian system. There are four interrelated and complementary parts. I think several people already mentioned: power, ideology, property, and coordination mechanism. I took it from his book. The case of today's China, using Kornai's language, can be characterized as follows. First, undivided power of the Communist Party. In fact, increasingly more centralized and unified. So, several people talked about that. Second, ideology. David talked about that. It's a mixed ideology of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Confucian tradition, and nationalism. So David talked about that. Third, despite that a bigger part of the economy is produced by private firms, there's still strong state ownership and no private ownership of land. And fourth, coordination mechanism is mainly the market, but with strong state intervention. So today's China, according to Kornai, differs from the classical system, classic socialism, reformed socialism, also differs from typical capitalism. The troubling part comes from the fact that its economy is still doing well so far, and very well by international standards. So that's the troubling part. Of course, we don't know what happens next and how long China's economic performance can be sustained, but it is already sustained for 40 years. And the current assessment, using all available information, is that China is positioned to overtake the US in total GDP within the next 10 years by most investment banks and World Bank and IMF as well. Japan and Soviet Union were never that close. I think Janos will agree that one of the most critical factors for sustainability is innovation. We have some understanding for the reasons why China did well in the above four examples. In all four examples, two important reasons are. The following are speculations, hypotheses, but with some thinking. I think why that China is doing so well in some areas of innovation, in the 4 examples I gave. I think there are 2 reasons that we have not thought before. The first reason is that the very original ideas were not invented from China, but China made use of other ideas to further innovate. And second, the size of China made a huge difference. Let me explain. In the case of high-speed rail, the original technologies were from Germany and Japan. But China, based on that technologies, improved and innovated and put them into a large scale of construction operation, resulting in the largest high-speed rail system in the world. In the case of e-commerce of Alibaba and social media and social network of WeChat, the original technologies were from the US. But with the Chinese innovation and the huge market, they overtake the original innovators. In fact, before WeChat, there was Kik in the US, KakaoTalk in Korea, and Line in Japan. But none of them developed into the very innovative products as WeChat. Therefore, these 2 factors, the openness of the economy to ideas and the size of the economy, played a critical role. But they were not analyzed with great length as part of the system analysis before. Then that raised the question. Finally, I want to end my talk with the question. We have some understandings, but what are the deep tensions between the different parts of the system, and especially what are the tensions between the system and innovation? China can do some innovation now, but for how long? Some people already said, this is something that very provocative, China said that the Cold War is over and China won. I don't think so. I think it's too early to say this, but it is not too early to contemplate on the possibility and its consequences for the world. That's why I think Cornell's work is so important for research today, because it focuses explicitly on the system. I remember some 10 years ago, there was a worry about doing research on transition, the worry about its ending, the worry that it's ending of transition. Well, some part of the transition is indeed over, but the entire transformation of the system is not. We have seen this from yesterday's discussion on the U-turn on Hungary and perhaps Poland. We see even more clearly today the discussion on China. As we celebrate Janusz Kornel's 90th birthday and his many fundamental contributions to economics and social sciences, I think it is appropriate to quote Winston Churchill here, but this time in the context of the research on social system and transformation, that now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of beginning. Thank you very much.